My name is Tyron Seal, and I've been asked to facilitate this morning's session. I'd like to start by welcoming our President, Cyril Ramaphosa, to the Port of Cape Town, where he's had an opportunity to visit the port, see its operations, hear about its challenges, and also hear about its future. But the President has joined us today to make an announcement on South African ports and their role in the efficiency, very broadly, of our economy. So before we get into the Q&A, Mr. President, I'm going to invite you to the podium to make the announcement, and thereafter I will introduce the delegation who's joined you on this occasion, and we will then go to our colleagues in the media. I think I've seen about 23 participants who will be putting questions to you in the panel. So welcome, Mr. President.
I'm waiting for my iPad. Somebody stole my iPad. Somebody decided that they want to dispossess me of my iPad. So I want that. Can I have my iPad, please? So they stole it. I had my iPad. So where do you know where they took my iPad to? This is the problem of always handing out your gadgets to other people. It's always best that I should keep all these things with me all the time. I had my iPad. I had it in my hand. It's gone. They've lost it, it seems. Should I sit down? Okay.
This morning, Minister of Transport, Fikile Mbalula, you're very welcome. Mr. David Mania, the Western Cape Minister for Finance and Economic Opportunities, Ms. Portia Darby, the Group Chief Executive of Transnet, and Mr. Silinga, the CEO of the Transnet National Ports Authority. You are all very welcome to this briefing, which, as I said earlier, will underscore the importance of our ports to our economy and to our competitiveness in the global economy, and to maximize South Africa's position at the southern tip of Africa as an important player in the global logistics chain. So, Mr. President, I think you have been suitably equipped now, and I'll invite you to the podium. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your patience. Minister of Public Enterprises, who is online somewhere. Minister of Transport, Minister Fikile Mbalula. The Premier of the Western Cape has had to leave to go to other issues, but we've got the MEC here, Mr. David Menier, who used to be in Parliament, whose debates I used to enjoy most, and he's abandoned Parliament. I wish he could come back. Ms. Portia Debi, the Group CEO of Transnet, various executives from Transnet, and the officials who run this port of Cape Town. Good morning. I'm really delighted to be here in Cape Town at the port. I've had a wonderful tour of the port and looked at how our port here in Cape Town operates. I have in the past weeks spent time in Durban Port as well, just to look at how they operate and the challenges they face and what future they are plotting for themselves going forward. During the past several weeks, our efforts to accelerate the implementation of the structural economic reforms have been gaining momentum, as we said they would. These reforms are crucial, extremely crucial to enabling a strong economic recovery and to placing our economy on a much faster and more sustainable economic trajectory. The reforms that we've spoken about are necessary to modernize as well as to transform our network industries, to increase the efficiencies that we need, to reduce costs, and to make our exports much more competitive. Most importantly, these reforms are necessary to accelerate the creation of jobs. It is for this reason that we are focused on reforms in electricity, in water, in digital communications, and in transport, as well as reforms of our visa regime. Today, we are announcing another major step forward in our reform agenda, which will have a significant impact on our port system. South Africa's ports are vital to the trade of the country with the rest of the world, and they play a crucial role both in our own economy and that of the wider Southern African region, SADC. There are therefore massive benefits to be realized from reliable, efficient, and competitive ports. The Port of Cape Town is strategically located on one of the busiest international shipping routes and is our second largest container port by volume after Durban. It is particularly important for the export of our fresh food. If the port functions efficiently, the economy of the Western Cape, and indeed the economy of the entire country, benefits. If port services are inefficient and costly, or if imports and exports are delayed, the economy suffers. In recent years, the performance of our ports has declined, particularly in comparison with other ports on the continent and around the world. This has had a significant impact on our exports, rendering South African products less competitive and increasing the cost of goods for every South African. We have set out to reverse this decline in performance and to position our ports as world-class facilities that can enable our economic growth. And we do have the capacity and the capability to be world-class. The board of Transnet and the new management team have done extremely well to stabilize our state-owned enterprise company, Transnet. They've developed a world-class strategy and undertake actions to promote investment and improve performance at our ports. This is an important part of the economic reconstruction and recovery plan that we developed together with our social partners, they being business, labor, and communities. The weak performance of our ports is the result of structural challenges in our logistics system and operational inefficiencies. It is for this reason that we are today announcing the establishment of the Transnet independent subsidiary of Transnet in line with the national ports users. At the same time, Transnet will remain the sole shareholder of the subsidiary to prevent any negative impact on the group's balance sheet and to ensure that the Ports Authority remains an important part of the Transnet Group. This is a really significant development because this reform has been delayed for more than 15 years since the National Ports Act was promulgated. It has taken that long, and today we are reforming this whole process so that we can gain greater efficiencies and greater capabilities. As part of our economic reconstruction and recovery plan, we are making progress in overcoming long-standing obstacles and bringing an end to delays in the implementation of our reforms. Together with the restructuring of Eskom, this is part of our ongoing effort to reposition as well as to transform our state-owned enterprises so that they can be profitable, sustainable, and competitive, and can play a developmental role in our economy, and so that they can also be profitable. This reform will have a direct impact on port users and our export industries. They will benefit from increased efficiency, lower costs, and new investment in port infrastructure. It will also have an impact on the lives of ordinary South Africans who will benefit from the lower prices of goods and more jobs throughout the export value chain. It may not be obvious to us as South Africans, but almost every single product that we purchase is affected in one way or another by our ports. That is why every South African should really be pleased and celebrate the steps that we are now taking to turn our ports around. The changes that we are announcing today cannot be separated from the ongoing work to improve efficiency and also to invest in infrastructure in our ports. The implementation of this measure is a crucial part of Transnet's broader strategy to revitalize our logistics infrastructure, including by developing strategic partnerships with the private sector to attract new investment and to enhance terminal operations. Transnet has put in place an ambitious plan to invest 100 billion rand over the next 5 years. Now, this it will do in upgrading its infrastructure across the port system. We want to do this because we truly want to modernize our port system. Earlier, I was talking about the Premier of the Western Cape, and now we're talking about the marvel that we all had when we visited Singapore port and we saw how well it operates. Now, Transnet is now following in the steps of ports of real note in the world like Singapore. And I think we have the capability to do it. Because achieving this target of investing 100 billion rand in the next 5 years will rely on leveraging private capital to shore up the contributions of the state and establish world-class infrastructure at our ports. Now, I wish to make it clear that state ownership of the ports remain our policy, and we will not compromise on that. All of our ports, as well as our rail infrastructure, are strategic national assets that belong to the people of South Africa. That is why the National Ports Authority and its assets will remain in the ownership of the state. Simply put, they will remain in the ownership of the people of South Africa. Where the private sector can and should play a role is in partnering with the state to improve terminal operations and to invest in new infrastructure, as is already the case in several of our bulk cargo terminals. There will be no job losses as a result of the creation of the new subsidiary. Only greater efficiency and more investment will follow. To implement this reform, Minister of Public Enterprises will appoint an interim board by the 30th of June to oversee the establishment of the new subsidiary, ensuring that this process is concluded as quickly as possible. We will ensure that an inclusive consultative process is undertaken throughout this process so that all key stakeholders are involved. Transnet will continue its work to improve operational performance by introducing new technology, maintaining and replacing old equipment, upskilling its workforce, and ensuring that it has the right expertise in place. And I have been impressed by the dedication and the effectiveness of the new management team that's led by Portia Debbie, which has worked tirelessly to reverse the damage done in the past by state capture and to put the company on a new footing. I'm confident that this team, with the support of the Department of Public Enterprises and Transport, has the necessary experience and the skill to accomplish this task. And I'm convinced that the establishment of an independent National Ports Authority will mark the beginning of a new era for South African ports. Like each of the structural reforms that we are implementing, this announcement was preceded by many months of intensive work by the Department of Public Enterprises, the Department of Transport, and Transnet itself, and this has been done most effectively as well. I would like to thank Minister Pravin Gordhan, Minister Fikile Mbalula, the Transnet CEO, and their teams for taking this bold step forward in establishing a world-class, modern, and competitive logistics system. I'd like to believe that we are now on the move. As we announce more and more reforms, we are repositioning our economy. We are moving forward with speed and determination to accelerate structural reforms and achieve a swift and lasting economic recovery. At this point, I'd like to hand over to the Minister of Public Enterprises to elaborate on the steps that we are taking to implement the reforms and other measures to improve the performance of our ports. This is a significant day, and I'm glad that I've been at this port to see how it operates, And it's been a joy to see all the young people, the people who work as either as pilots, to shepherd in the ships, the big ships as they come in, all the people who direct the traffic, and all the people who are planning the future of this port. They know their work, and they are highly motivated, and this is the type of management team that we need in all our state-owned enterprises. And today I'm elated, and I leave Cape Town after this announcement knowing that we are on the right path. And thank you, all of you. Thank you.
Mr. President, good morning to you. And I was too scared of the weather in Cape Town to join you, so forgive me for that. My greetings also to my colleague, Mr. Mbalula, and to an old colleague in Parliament, as you said, David Mania from the Western Cape, and Ms. Darby and her team, and other officials from the Department of Public Enterprises and Transport. If I can just elaborate on a few points that you've made, Mr. President. The first is the process that we're going to follow to establish the National Port Authority as a completely owned subsidiary of Transnet as a group. The first step, of course, is to make us to receive the Section 54, Section 54 of the TSMA application to ourselves, and then subsequently to the National Treasury at the appropriate time. Secondly, this will, once the preparatory work has been done, will be presented as is required by law after consultation with the Ministers of Transport and Finance. Thirdly, a lot of preparatory work will go into the transfer of property, liabilities, and other elements from Transnet to now within the Port Authority itself, although much of it is already there. We will finalize the Memorandum of Incorporation in terms of the Companies Act, but also in compliance with the Ports Act. As you pointed out, Mr. President, an interim board will be put into place. And yesterday, Mr. President, I met with the two principal unions that operate within Transnet, and they were quite happy with this announcement, but also happy with the point that you've made, that there will be intensive consultations as we go through this process, and give them the assurance that you've given that there will not be any job losses. But similarly, there will be consultations with other stakeholders who have an interest in the efficiency and effectiveness of our ports. It might be of interest, particularly in the Cape Town context, to inform our colleague David Mania that last week the Minister of Agriculture and myself met the citrus and fruit industry leadership, including the organized agriculture leadership as well, and assured them of Transnet's fullest cooperation. They've had a bumper crop this year, and in the coming 2 or 3 months, they need to ensure that the export of that crop happens effectively. And as Hilary Joffe pointed out earlier on, the preparatory work is in a much better state this year, notwithstanding the third wave of COVID, than a similar time last year as far as Cape Town is concerned. The second set of points to reinforce what you said, Mr. President, is that in establishing the Ports Authority as an independent subsidiary of Transnet, what we are in fact doing, and you have announced today, is a reform of the entire port system in South Africa. And the Transnet team has to be complemented for committed and dedicated time that they've given to developing the plans, and there's further work in this particular area. The Ports Authority and the role definition and separation is quite important. So its role, as you pointed out, will be to be the landlord, to be the developer of our ports and attract whatever investment it can in that process. And thirdly, the provider of marine services, which is, as you pointed out, bringing in the ships into the harbor, after which the terminal operators actually take over. And this will then revamp the structure of the port system in South Africa. Secondly, the role of the terminal operators will be quite crucial, as you pointed out. And there are some requests for information that will be issued in the coming months, which would indicate to Transnet the kind of interest that there is from various stakeholders, but also what their needs are, because Transnet needs to be mindful of the needs of industry and position itself to respond to those needs as well. The third element is a short-term action plan in which Transnet has in particular taken extra precautions this year to ensure that the Cape Town port has the necessary equipment and also the management of staff, so that the kind of difficulties that we experienced last year because of COVID infection amongst those that have to work at the docks does not recur. And what we will be doing in the coming weeks and months is also to look at the entire value chain of, for example, the citrus and fruit industry. There are trucks that bring, for example, fruit, particularly avocados and citrus, all the way from Limpopo. They then come to a depot in the Cape Town area and then get positioned into refrigerated containers. And Transnet has ensured that there are sufficient what they call plug points for these containers themselves. So understanding the value chain in its entirety will also help us to understand how the transport times are shortened between different stages in that value chain, and thereby work with industry to make sure that our products reach their export destinations in as precious state as possible. So I want to just reiterate the last point, which is that there will be intensive consultations with all of the stakeholders as we go forward. And Transnet is now well on its way to overcome some of the legacy, as you pointed out, of the state capture period, when resources within Transnet to the tune of billions of rands were misaligned to the actual needs of the port system, so that those billions can be stolen in one form or another. But what you have announced today, I think, is an indication to all of the stakeholders and the public that Transnet is now going to intensify its efforts to transform its core business and serve the South African economy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister Gordon, for that input, and apologies from my side for not introducing you earlier, but thank you very much for joining the discussion this morning. Mr. President, I think it's now anchors away, as they say in the maritime business, for questions. We have a number of journalists as guests online, and we'll now open the session to questions. Thank you very much. May I see some hands, please? What do we have? The President has prophesied that there are no questions here today.
Good morning. Lindsay Dentlinger, ENCA. Just a very short question. The President mentioned the establishment of an interim board by the end of the month, but how long are you expecting this entire unbundling process, if I can call it that? How long will that take?
Thank you, Lindsay. We've got Hilary Joffe.
Good morning, Mr. President, and the others, including the Transnet Group CEO. And I wondered if I could put a question to both of you. Beyond simply unbundling the Port Authority itself, what plans are there to address the other constraints on exports and indeed imports, which are stopping goods getting to the ports at all? For example, we know that in a year in which coal prices globally are incredibly high, the coal producers can't get their goods to Richards Bay because of Transnet's rail issues, and there seem to be issues on quite a lot of the rail lines. Equally, I'm told that getting ships into the ports can take kind of 94 days. They sit out there, which seems to involve not only the Port Authority but also the Port Health, possibly customs. So the question to both of you is what plans are there to really repair the whole system which is constraining our exports, particularly on the rail side, but also on the port side more broadly?
Thank you, Hilary. Colleagues, I'll ask you just to keep questions a little briefer. But then we have Christian. I don't want us to deal with this alphabetically, so I think we should just go all the way down the list. But Christian, could we have your question, please?
This is Carien du Plessis from Netwerk Winter. My question is to Minister Gordhan. The World Bank listed South African ports as container ports as some of the worst performing, not even in the world, but in Africa. And the reason for this, is it a recent development, and why is this the case? Can we just get some clarity on that? Thank you so much, Minister.
May we have one more question in this round, please, before we take another round of 5? Bulelani Philip, who's in the room with us in Cape Town.
Hi, it's Bulelani Philip from the SABC. Pardon me, Mr. President, for deviating. But I want to get your views on the statements that have been made by former President Thabo Mbeki that land expropriation without compensation will deter investments. I want to get your comment on that. The second question, again, on the sale of SAA to an equity partner, how do you justify that you can sell a stake in SAA to a consortium that does not even have funding? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bulelani. Mr. President.
Portia, I hope you have a microphone next to you, because I'm going to delegate upwards. I think the first question was, how long will the unbundling process take? We're trying to move with our reform process with speed, and we would like, once the board has been put in place, that it should continue with the process, but in the same period we will be proceeding with all other processes to continue with our reforms. Now, we want to do this as quickly as possible. I have said before that I continue to be extremely concerned about the long periods that it takes to get things done in South Africa. That must now be cut. I'd like everything that we do in terms of either regulatory process or permit process and all that to be cut by half. If it takes 6 months, it must now be done by 3 months, within 3 months. Because much of what really puts the brakes on our economic growth is the long periods that it takes to get things done. And I'd like us to get out of our comfort zones, all of us as South Africans, that we must work with some measure of speed. We must pick up the pace of getting things done. And quite often you find that it is not really necessary to take so long to process things. And it's like a disease. I think I also have it, and many of us have it. And I'd like us to shed this disease off our backs and get things done quicker and sooner. So this process of restructuring of Transnet, I would like to see it happening sooner rather than later. Hilary Joffe, you've asked a question which I would like to be preceded by Portia's answer. But all said and done, what plans do we have to repair the entire system? And I said when we were in Durban, and I say it again today, I've been hugely impressed by the strategic plans that Portia, Debbie, and her team have put together. They have impressed me immensely by being good planners. Even here at the Cape Town port, they have someone who just focuses on plans, and they're looking to the future. They are planning for the next 20, 25 years. And even issues of the rail, they are already on top of that, and they've got really good plans. And I will leave the details of that to Portia, because those are operational issues, and she'll be able to give us even the time frames and some of the details. And I guess your question is a good question, because our logistics system has been dogged by delays, by incapability, and as you correctly say, a number of shipping companies and countries have tended to, in a way, move away from some of our ports because we've not been performing as well as we should. Earlier, someone asked about the ranking on the World Bank list. I'm told that this is a recent sort of measurement process where we've been found to be right at the bottom, slightly better than one or two other ports on the African continent, but admittedly not as good as we should be, and being really at the bottom. Now, I spoke to the management team earlier and said, if anything, this should really propel us to do a lot better. Much as it is a new index, and which measures, certain things and just plugs out a number, I see it very in serious light and would like us to perform much better. We are right at the bottom, and there's no reason why we should not be amongst the top performing ports in the world. And the management team that Portia leads has all the determination to get up to that level. You asked about, and this is a complete deviation, a deviation which you yourself admit, raising the issue of the land question. Seeing that I'm here, yes, I'll prefer an answer. If you read the input of the article, that's the paper that's been written by President Mbeki, former President Mbeki, you will find that in that article he finally reverts back to the decision that was taken by the National Executive Committee, that in the end we need to work out how expropriation of land without compensation will function or will work. and under what circumstances expropriation of land will take place. Now, that is the final paragraph that he puts on his piece, meaning that the decision that was taken by the National Conference of the ANC is a decision that stands. And right now, our colleagues in Parliament are dealing with the matter to give fulfillment to that decision. And if you look at that resolution closely, you will find that it says we need to look at how this process will be done and under what circumstances it will be done, as well as look very closely at the issue of investment, food production, and making sure that it will contribute to the growth of our economy. Now, already, I appointed a panel on land, and it came out with a number of conclusions which bears testimony to that if we were to embark on a land reform process that will include all the elements, we should be able to see growth ensuing in our economy. Now, with regard to SAA, I'd like the Minister Godan to answer this question, because the Department of Public Enterprises is the one that has been involved in seeing how best we can reposition South African Airways. And they have been in negotiations with these partners. And what is happening now is that there's a due diligence process. It's a due diligence on SAA. We are also conducting a due diligence on them. And in the end, much as they may be at the moment a preferred partner, a deal has not been done. There is no deal. Due diligence means that you want to look at everything closely to see whether the various conditions, the various parameters that you have will indeed be fulfilled. So I just wanted to say there is no deal. The only process that we're involved in is that they've passed a certain post. They are now in due diligence. And having been involved in businesses in the past, I know for a fact that being in a due diligence process does not mean that you've done a deal, because due diligence by its very nature and definition means that you're going to look more closely at the company and at the partners, and a whole number of things can be unraveled. You can look at all those things come to the fore, and in the end, you may find that, do I proceed with a deal or do I not proceed with the deal? So your question may be a question that seems relevant, but in the end, it is a question that should be asked once that process is done to say, okay, are you able to fulfill all these requirements? And if you are able to fulfill them, show us the money. And that is when, as they say in the classics, that is when the tire hits the tar, or the rubber hits the tar. And that is when finally a deal is done. Right now we are at the preliminary stages, and I don't think one is able to say in a definitive way that that is the case, because their own ability to raise the money or to come up with the money is really also going to depend on what they find in SAA, because if they find there are worms, if they find there are snakes and all that, they may say, we don't want to proceed. And so due diligence means that you are being very careful, and on both sides, on the state side and on the other side as well. And as often happens with these transactions, in the end, much as you've gone through a number, you then have to give one the exclusivity. One must then have exclusive ability to go forward, to go and look at the company. So this one has been chosen to have the exclusivity to go through this process, and afterwards a determination will be made on both sides whether they are the best suitors and the best acquirers or not. Portia, I think you now have to come and sing for your lunch.
Good afternoon, Mr. President, ministers, public enterprises and transport. Interesting questions that I should answer, and actually maybe what we should do is do an invite to the media so that we can have a conversation with you, because it's a lot more complicated than just meets the eye.
Than just me talking.
Well, even as just answering the question as well. So the 94-day delay really doesn't exist, and really I'd appreciate getting a little bit more detail where that came from at the ports. However, having said that, we accept the fact that it's a complicated system. The nomination of vessels is done by customers. That's not done by ourselves. We've actually been quite upfront in terms of discussing some of the challenges that we've had on the rail system, in particular cable theft, and we've been making a lot of noise, and the mining industry is on side with this, and I think Mr. President and Minister Praveen Gordhan would know that, and soon the Minister of Transport as well is going to be inundated with letters from industry, because that is a serious problem in our system. On any given week, 30 to 40% of the delays on the rail system are because of cable theft that we have. Which are truly delaying, and they damage at the end of the day. So there's enough of that we can put on the table. Mr. President, as we were talking as well, one of the challenges that we've had, which is tied to the 1064 process, where in some of the locos that we knew we needed to change some of the parts which were coming to the end of warranty, and because of the whole tussle, we've struggled to replace traction motors and the rest and the like. And then, I mean, it's a fact that we have delayed in some of the maintenance of the track throughout the country. And in particular, some areas are more sensitive than other areas. So on a weekly basis, we have a report that gets produced on how each of the corridors operates. We have that available, and it's not a secret. We're quite happy to share that so people have a sense of all of the challenges that we're facing in the system. So that Ayanda is here, who's our spokesperson, and she can arrange to have a meeting. So the other issue, Mr. President, that came up was how long it will take for us to get to corporatization of TNPA. For us, it is, in fact, a bringing in of a new era for Transnet, where we increasingly see ourselves as a holding company. So it's full steam ahead on our side. As you would know, we've already had a deemed board for TNPA. So it's just a matter of finalizing of what assets the total assets that go into TNPA, including the debts that we have to have. And as you know, when you borrow money from people, you need to get the lenders to approve our separation of debts, of liabilities and assets between Transnet and themselves. But we full steam ahead. The team at TNPA also are working on that. But Mr. President, I would be remiss if I didn't deal with this issue of indices. Now, I hear you when you say that we must accept the fact that we're at the bottom of a ranking. But I also worry about this fascination that we have with South Africans, is that the worse the data, the happier we are, and the more embracing we are of it as the truth. But it isn't. How many ports does Egypt have? Egypt's got one port, Port Said. And if you're investing for one port, it's not the same thing as having to invest for 7 commercial ports. And so the point that was made earlier about the commercial port strategy being one of a complementary port system, which is what we're implementing, should see us come back in terms of the ranking. So it's too simplistic to say Port Said relative to South Africa, because you've got to look at a series of indices, and looking at the series of indices, you then start identifying the areas in which we have weaknesses. I find it amazing that the very same World Bank has another index, which is called the Logistics Performance Index, right? And we are ranked number 33. Nobody talks about that. Everybody is fascinated with 347 and 349. We know those numbers. We'll be dealing with it. Worst of all, that data point is for the year when we had COVID, January 2020 to December 2020, we had the hardest lockdown. And one of the things they were looking at, what were the volumes that were moving out of your ports. So not to be defensive, but I do think that it's about time that we actually just reflected the truth. But in as far as engaging with the media around all of the operations of Transnet, we are more than open to, because frankly, as you rightfully put it, I couldn't agree with you more. All of the assets of Transnet belong to every single one of us. One of the big challenges that we've put to the team is that how do we get back to a point where all of us in South Africa understand that we have stewardship responsibility for these assets, and that when there is cable theft, when there's any problem that happens, we have the very same owners of these assets start to bring the information to the fore, because we know, and people would know, who the syndicate leaders are, who are the cause of some of these problems. And our biggest challenge, even yesterday, we arrested some people who were involved in fuel theft. But we get to the guys who get hired, but we're struggling to get to the leaders of the syndicates. We get there, they live in South Africa, they are South Africans. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Portia Darby. Colleagues, I think there was one question that was referred to, or I think where the President referred to Minister Gordhan. I just want to check, Minister, if you do want to come in on that one. Otherwise, I would also, mindful of time, like us to move towards a close with questions by Mike Cohen and Carien du Plessis. Carien du Plessis, just to warn you, Mr. President, has indicated that she will deviate with her question. She will deviate. So you have advance warning, and then finally, Atim Tugana, who's in the room with us. So let's start with just to find out if Minister Gordhan did want to join. Otherwise, we'll go to Mike Cohen. Minister.
No, the President, as a business person, can answer that question much better than I can, and he's done it brilliantly. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Then I think we'll go to Mike, Carien, and Ati, who's in the room with us. Thank you. Mike.
Thanks, Ryan. Mike Cohen from Bloomberg News. Could you please tell us what this reorganization of the ports will mean for port tariffs? Thanks.
Carien.
Thank you, Tyrone. Good afternoon, Mr. President. I have two questions, and I'm glad Tyrone warned you that I'll be very obedient. The one is about something that we're very preoccupied with in Gauteng at the moment. We're talking about you've been talking about economic recovery and investment, but we're really feeling the third wave here in Gauteng, COVID-19. I just want to know, does the increasing rate of infections in Gauteng worry you? And do you think it's worth keeping the economy open at the expense of people's health at this point? And second question, there's another SADC summit tomorrow on the situation in Cabo Delgado. Can we expect to see any decision on interventions, and what kind of interventions do you expect anything? Thank you.
Atim Tungana in the room with us.
Thank you so much, and good afternoon to the President. I'm also going to deviate completely. Just to add on to the question that was asked just now, we understand that the NCCC is due to meet, and like the previous speaker just mentioned, that Gauteng is currently experiencing a surge in the COVID-19 figures. Are you considering a different level in terms of restrictions for Gauteng? And now that you're here, President, we don't normally get you to ask questions in Cape Town, but the Western Cape is venturing into trying to procure its own vaccines. I'm just interested to find out what your view is that, and as far as it's concerned. Thank you.
Thanks, Ati. That was our final question today, Mr. President.
I'm going to ask Portia to come and answer the question on tariffs, because I wouldn't know that. I want to be enlightened by Portia as well, because from time to time I do look at the tariffs ranking of ports in the world. And Portia, I last looked at it about a year and a half ago. So maybe I should keep it on my screen now and see how we rank in relation to ports. In relation to Carien du Plessis' question on the infection rates in Gauteng, whether I'm worried, yes, I am deeply worried. We are seeing the infection rates that seem to be much higher than what we have seen before. And Premier Makura is dealing with this challenge as best as he can. And I know that the acting Minister of Health is also involved, and we are very grateful to have a soldiers corps who are able to go in and assist. The deployment of more medical personnel is obviously one of the things we need, as well as hospital beds. And I know that they are opening up as many hospital beds as they possibly can. And of course, the challenge of oxygen availability and ventilators is another one. So we are involved in a very, very serious situation in relation to the pandemic in Gauteng, and we're also seeing it rising in other parts of the world. Here as well in the Western Cape, I was talking to Premier Alan Winde earlier, and we are seeing signs of that as well. So we are in the third wave, as we did say, and the issue of moving on to another level is a matter that is going to be discussed by the NCCC, and the NCCC will meet and make recommendations. And clearly, there seems to be indications that we've got to increase the measures, particularly in Gauteng, that we have imposed or put in place. And Carien, you ask a very important question. What do we do as the infection rate is going up? Do we keep the economy going at the expense of lives? And we've always said that we will have a balance because the lives of our people are extremely important, as are their livelihoods. So we have always sought to keep a very good balance. When the pandemic started, we did impose a very hard lockdown, possibly harder than many other nations, and that helped to bring the rate of infections down, and everybody did see the need for it. But with time, we had to ease off, and we had to move from level 5 to 4, and finally to 3 and 2 and 1, and now we've moved back to 3, and the infections are just continuing to rise. So that calls for us to review exactly where we are and continue to see how best we can create that delicate balance between saving lives as well as the livelihoods of our people. Now, Ati raised another question related to the issue of COVID. You raised whether we will move to another level. The answer is the same. We are going to be making the assessments. And the suggestion from the Western Cape that they will acquire vaccines, we've always said that, you know, the whole process of acquiring vaccines all over the world is a government-inspired process. And we are looking at national governments worldwide being the ones who are the key players, and even vaccine manufacturers have developed a greater comfort in dealing with governments because there are guarantees that have to be signed, and they can only really be signed by national governments, where we negotiate with these pharmaceutical companies, and at times it is country to country. So you know, last night I was talking to the President of the European Union about vaccines, and we are going to have a further conversation, and she's going to do her own consultation, President Ursula von der Leyen, and it is at government level. Now, of course, everybody, not only the Premier of the Western Cape, but everybody, including companies and so forth, would like to acquire vaccines, and that would be well and good if in the ecosystem that now currently exists, it was really possible. The ecosystem is such that it is national governments who've been able to offer all the guarantees that these pharmaceutical companies want. In case of failure of the vaccine and many people get sick or whatever happens, it is national government that has to come to the party, and that is why they've had the comfort to be able to strike deals with national companies, with national governments rather. The issue of Carien, of tomorrow's meeting in Mozambique. I'll be traveling to Mozambique. We're going to have a SADC summit in Mozambique, and of course one of the issues on the agenda is the conflict in Cabo Delgado in Mozambique. That is going to be discussed, and this is going to follow on the discussions and the decisions that were taken in the past that also include the recommendations from the assessment team that was sent to go and make an assessment on what type of intervention that SADC needs to make. And tomorrow we are going to be receiving further that report, and we obviously are all convinced that we cannot allow a situation where insurgents just infiltrate a country, take over a particular area, a region, and kill people and displace many people just like that, and we all sit and not support. So support is required, and support is going to be given so that we are able to restore stability in Mozambique. The extent of the support is something that obviously we are still going to discuss, because it is a matter that we all need to reach agreement on. I think that covers everything save for the tariffs, and Portia will answer that as well.
Thank you, Mr. President. My name is Bepi Silinga. I'm the Managing Executive in charge of Transnet National Port Authority, Honorable Ministers and MEC as well. The tariff determination process is a legislated process. It's underpinned by some scientific process, in the sense that there are inputs, some of which would be a function of what's going to be happening in the finalization of the corporatization process. One of those, as an example to illustrate, would be the cost of debt, how much debt you take on board, to the extent that we are creating public assets with the strategic intent of lowering the cost of doing business. That input, which is considered by the regulator of South Africa, they are the ones we make inputs to them, but they are the ones who actually determine that. Safe to say that in the past year, there's been a significant reduction, particularly on the mineral side of things, and their intention, as correctly pointed out, is to reduce the cost of doing business. So the details will unfold, Mr. President, as we finalize the implementation of the decision taken. But ultimately, the determinant is the port regulator of South Africa. Thank you.
Yeah, I would have said the same thing.
Thank you, Pepe, for that input. That does bring us to the end of today's session. I want to thank you, Mr. President, and your delegation for joining us today, and Portia for hosting. The President does need to set sail for his next engagement, so we're going to call this closed. Thank you very much to our colleagues in the media for joining us today, and thank you to the technical team for making this interaction possible. Thank you very much.